Hello, I'm Jacqueline Isaacs, also known as the Unsmug Mum, and jacquelineisaacs.co.uk, and in my previous video I introduced this guy, our liver. Our liver, which I have envisaged as having, it has two main pathways to deal with two different types of energy source, one being our carbs, our starches, our glucose energy, and the other being our fats, our dietary fat, our fat energy. And these are dealt with in two different ways, two different pathways. So I've envisaged them as two different checkouts, a two checkout supermarket, one little dude in the middle trying to deal with both. Okay, and this has started to help us imagine and maybe understand a little bit more again as to how our man-made starchy carbohydrates really do need slowing down, because as we've talked about, our man-made starchy carbohydrates are like concentrated sources of starch, and so starch, which is already many sugars, suddenly becomes many sugars, which is very easily digested, and we'll hit this dude really quickly. So we can start to appreciate, to help our little dude with his carb checkout, is to just slow that onslaught down with some soluble and insoluble fibre, our hairy porridgey plug holes and sticks down a stream, which even sweeps some of it through and doesn't even reach him. So that hopefully will help cement that little bit in our heads. We then also began to talk about carbs and fats and how they are found in nature. Hold on, swap hands. And we started to talk about how it was interesting that Mother Nature separated her carbs and her fats, and that generally speaking that carbs are generally no fat, so there's that one source there, either all or mostly starch energy, for instance our glucose, or our Mother Nature's source of dietary fat tends to be no carb. She keeps them separate. So if you imagine our meat, our fish, our poultry, no carbs. Okay, obviously protein in there as well, but let's just concentrate on the separation between carbs and fats because of our two different pathways in our liver. Okay, and so we discussed that there were a couple of exceptions in terms of plants, and we talked about avocados, olives and coconut being examples of those exceptions, and that they may be plant, not animal, but they are still mostly fat. They are very minimal starch, so they can quite neatly sit on the fat side. So it's interesting that, what came first, who knows, chicken or egg? The food that Mother Nature has created for us, Mother Nature has separated our carbs and our fats, and our liver deals with carb energy and fat energy different on two different checkouts. And actually it's quite obvious really, because they're very different. And if you just envisaged maybe mixing some sugar or some flour, some carb energy into some hot water, for instance, that's going to dissolve. Whereas if you try mixing fat, you say maybe some oil in that water, it's going to stay separate. So they are very different. And going back to this, just to finish, obviously the exceptions in nature where both starches and fats are found being nuts and seeds, for example, she packaged with lots and lots of fibre, her natural packaging, her hairy porridgey plug holes and sticks down a stream to help really slow the onslaught of those two energies arriving at the same time. Okay, so we began to grasp that concept. And then we discussed our hunter-gatherer origins. We talked about, if I just grab this, how it's interesting how there's been a lot of that batted around recently. There's been talk of perhaps it would be better for us to eat more like our ancestors and be more hunter or more gatherer. So we talked about maybe hunter being a bit more paleo, as they tend to avoid a lot of the starchy carbohydrates, the man-made starchy carbohydrates and the grains, for instance. They still eat a lot of plant, they eat fruit and veg, but they're generally meat, fish, poultry, and generally I think low carb, versus another one, which is vegan. You know, aside from the ethical reasons about choosing to be vegan, you've got, is it being battered around as a plant-based diet being healthier for us? Okay, so we think gatherer, and we think plants, you know, fruits, vegetables, and so forth. Plant-based diet. What's interesting is that both of these are a sort of natural separation in just the way as Mother Nature separated her carbs and her fats, and our liver, the way that that deals with them separately. So did we cause ourselves a problem, for instance, by being a gourmet? So going from our hunter-gatherer roots, because we probably weren't necessarily exclusively one or the other, but we would have been only one of those, one at a time. We can't hunt and gather at the same time. So if we'd hunted, we weren't gathering, we were hunting meat, and we were then probably killing meat and eating meat. And then gathering, well, it's kind of difficult to hunt for an animal whilst you're gathering berries and roots and things and digging through dirt and stuff. So we were probably eating those types of foods one at a time. So then, do we need to revert, not necessarily exclusively to one or the other, but do we need to think about consuming them one at a time? Especially when we consider our liver, for instance, has two different pathways for dealing with those two sorts of energies. Okay, so let's explore that a little bit. Did we give ourselves a problem becoming a gourmet? Now, obviously, just to remind that when we do consume whatever food, whether it be lots of man-made starchy carbohydrates or fat energy or carb energy at the same time, Mother Nature gave us her clue, packaged her sugars and her combo starch-fat combos with fibre. So fiber's going to work some magic either way. So hairy porridge plug holes, 6 down a stream. So keep that in mind. Always consume your energy with fibre. Yeah? Energy with fibre. Your carbs and your fats with fibre. All right. So let's get rid of that high tech. So let's go back to this little dude. And what we were just saying, are we causing our problems by becoming gourmets and eating both fats and our starch energy at the same time, our glucose and our fats at the same time? Does that mean that they hit this little dude at the same time? Busy, busy, busy. Does that overload our liver? What happens to stuff? Does stuff start falling off the checkouts? Okay. Here's one I made earlier. Recognise this diagram again? I know, I've rehashed all my diagrams. So here we go. I've done some nice drawings on this. You see some beautiful drawings. So this is my gut diagram, and we talked about our sugars and starches being largely digested in the mouth. There's the mouth, and in the stomach we talked about proteins being harder to digest, suppresses that hunger hormone ghrelin, now grumbly ghrelin for longer, so that's good, fuller for longer protein. And we talked about our fats, so we've got starch, carbohydrates being digested here, proteins being digested here, and we also have our fats. And we said that fats are also good. It's good to eat fat because that also triggers the release of leptin, assuming we are not leptin resistant. We are or have any sort of metabolic disease going on there that needs sorting out, some hormone imbalances. Fats will trigger our leptin release, which is our satiety hormone, which makes us feel satisfied. And obviously, just to finish off those 3 different types, food types, with obviously fibre being the only one that we do not digest and the only one that survives all the way through the mouth, through the stomach, through the 22-foot long intestines, which guess how long it takes to get through that lot? About 20 minutes. Sound familiar? Yeah, let your dinner go down for 20 minutes before you decide to get a second helping. It's because it takes about that long for it to wind all the way through our 22-foot long intestines, because they are really long, and to reach our poo factory, where at the end of those intestines it will trigger the release of peptide PYY, our appetite suppressing hormone. Yeah? So, you know, am I winning the case for fibre yet? But obviously, let's all, word of caution, let's just always remember, I must keep saying not too much. It is about boring balance. Fibre isn't going to differentiate between the good guys and the bad guys. Sticks down a stream, it will sweep nutrients out with it, as well as the excess bad stuff. So let's not overdo it. Too much of the good thing can be a bad thing too. Okie dokie. So, is becoming a gourmet and suddenly eating our fats and our starches together at the same time, two different energy types, causing us a problem? Do they hit our liver? Do they hit this little dude with his two simple checkouts at the same time and cause him a lot of grief? Well, to answer that question, let's go back to our lovely gut drawing. And first of all, let's completely take protein out of the equation. Protein, fuller for longer, stays in the stomach for longer, harder to digest. That is not going to hit the guts the same time as the starches and carbohydrates, the sugars and starches that have started to dissolve up here, right? That's going to be big pebbles need grinding down in the stomach. That's going to hang around in there. So, starches are going to whiz on through, especially if you've not eaten them with any fibre. They're going to whiz through our plug holes and our sieve-like holes in our intestines, and they are going to shoot through into something called the portal vein. That's going to go straight into our bloodstream, and the first place it goes is directly to the liver, which is this little dude with his checkouts. Okay, so let's remember, lots of starch on its own obviously would overload a checkout. But is eating dietary fat, as in the food fat, like food from meat or food from plants, or fat from plants, is eating fat at the same time as starch going to hit the liver at the same time? No. Put simply. So starch whizzes through the plug holes, gets broken down very easily. Don't forget, glucose is great. G for great, G for glucose, G for great, G for gimme, gimme, gimme. Every single cell in our body uses glucose. Our brain prefers it and will kick up a bit of a stink if it doesn't get it. Glucose is so important to us. Our body maintains glucose in our bloodstream at all times, because in case it's needed anywhere, because glucose is our most important fuel source. So those who are trying to scrimp on their glucose and go low carb, bearing that in mind, obviously we could do with slowing it down and maybe being aware of our man-made starchy carbohydrates and how easily it is to eat glucose to excess. But we do need glucose, so don't try and cut it out altogether. And let's not forget that sources of glucose are all those fruits, plants, vegetables. It's all the carbohydrate side, all the plants. So be that grains, potatoes, and so forth. The man-made stuff is the flour-made sort of the stuff that's had the fibre packaging taken away. So let's just make sure we eat it with fibre. Have I said that enough yet? So, if unimpeded, anyway, starch will get broken down very easily. G for great, G for gimme, gimme. It is going to get into our bloodstream very easily and go directly to the liver and arrive with this little dude. Okay, does fat go the same way? And this is the really important bit to bear in mind so that suddenly things become a little less scary. No, it does not. Fat goes up the yellow brick road. Can you see my lovely yellow thing here? So here's glucose, there's our starch going whiz straight into our bloodstream through the portal vein directly to our liver. Fat doesn't go that way. Why? It's too big. When fat goes through our guts and tries to get into our bloodstream, fat turns into balls, like globules of fat. I love that word, globules. All right, it's too big. It won't fit in that vein. It can't get through the surface of that blood vessel. It will not hit the liver first. Therefore, it will not hit the liver at the same time as the glucose. So where do these globules, these balls of fat go? They go up the yellow brick road. They go up the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system being the place that, I mean, I'm more concerned with the food side of things, but I think the lymphatic system is to do with, let's say, water retention and whisking water away from places. And if you get swollen ankles or so forth, that's to do with your lymphatic system, yeah? It also transports our fat. So this is really interesting in that fat does not go directly into our blood vessels like glucose does. Fat goes over via the yellow brick road. Fat goes through our lymphatic system. So it doesn't go directly into our bloodstream. It goes a different route, which is really interesting. Because our body, give it more credit than we have so far, is not going to daftly come up with a design that's going to overload this dude with things arriving at the same time. No, it goes two completely ways. It's deliberately designed it so fat cannot go that way exactly the same time as glucose and overload the little dude in our liver. It goes a completely different way. It goes up the lymphatic system. It goes up the yellow brick road, where eventually it will enter our bloodstream. And bearing in mind what pumps our bloodstream around our body, our heart. So that's interesting, I think, in itself to know when it comes to choosing our fats. Because if we bear in mind, we sort of have this vague notion that our body detoxes things before it goes around our bloodstream. Well, no, because the fat hasn't gone through the liver. It hasn't said, oh no, here's the good fats and here's the bad fats. We'll get rid of the bad and we'll just put the good into our bloodstream. No, all fat goes up the lymphatic system. All fat goes up the yellow brick road and into our bloodstream and gets pumped around by our heart. So it's quite an interesting concept, I think, to help when we make our food choices, when we really understand that, because yes, we kind of know that's good for us and that's not good for us and that's quite bad and maybe we shouldn't eat too much of that. It doesn't really help stop us eating it. We still kind of want it. But sometimes when we visualise what's happening inside our bodies, I found especially, it can help steer my choices sometimes away from things, because it kind of makes me feel a bit iffy about really, oh, that nasty deep fried fat is going to hit my heart first. It's not going to go through any detox stage. It's not going to go through my liver. That fat is going to go up the yellow brick road and hit my bloodstream and get circulated all around my body via my heart. So that's kind of interesting to know. Now, equally, does that mean then, is glucose energy preferred over fat energy? Well, no, because if I just get up my little list so that I remember, fat is extremely important for building our cell membranes and making our myelin sheaths. Now, myelin sheaths are what coat our nerve endings. So can you imagine if we were low on fat? That would not be good. So we need dietary fat, yeah? So trying to go low fat isn't, you know, necessarily the answer either. And now, as we have seen, because we now know fat that we eat in the form of fat, whether that be oil, animal fat or plant fat or whatever, goes a different route to glucose. It goes up the yellow brick road, whereas glucose shoots through, gets small enough that it shoots through and goes into the blood vessel, the portal vein, directly to the liver. We can then appreciate that even though hunter and gatherers weren't eating their fats and starches at the same time, our body was clever enough that even though the liver also deals with those fat energies in two different ways, two different pathways, therefore like two different checkouts, our body was clever enough that it made it impossible for the fats to arrive at the liver at exactly the same time, because fat, dietary fat, the fat that we eat, goes up the lymphatic system. It goes up the yellow brick road first. So, going back to this diagram, we have sugars and carbohydrates, sugars and starches. Our carbohydrate energy will whiz through the quickest, especially if we're not eating it with fibre, and whiz through and go directly to our liver. Proteins are like pebbles that need grinding down. They're going to hang around in our stomach. So there you go, there's a natural separation. And then fat is too big. The globules of fat are too big to get this way, so they go up the yellow brick road. So there's, can you see there's, it's like this natural separation of dealing with these different energy sources. Okay, so where does all the fat come from? Okay, let's go back to our liver. And this is kind of, I'm sorry, but a repeat of how I left you on the last video, because it's really important. Here's our liver. Here's two different pathways for dealing with two different energies. We have carbs, our starches, our glucose energy over here. And we have our fat energy pathway, our fat checkout over here. We have discovered that eating fat and starch at the same time doesn't necessarily mean they're going to hit the liver at the same time, because they go two different ways. So let's remind ourselves of what tabletop sugar, added sugar, the sugar that appears on ingredients lists, those glucose fructose syrups, the sugar that's in our puddings, our coffee, our tea, candy cane, sweetie sugar, is a disaccharide, easy for me to say. G for glucose, G for great, G for gimme, gimme. Body wants that, right? Whizzes through. What's it holding hands with? It's a disaccharide, therefore it's made up of two molecules, two sugar molecules. The second one being fructose, holding hands tightly with fructose. Let's go back to our modified liver diagram. G for glucose from our starches, our carbohydrate, G for glucose, red F for fats. Red F look familiar? I also gave fructose a red F, didn't I? Because fructose gets metabolised and digested and dealt with the same way fat does in the liver. It goes via the fat pathway. F for fructose, F for fat. So if that's the case, if glucose energy gets dealt with over here on this checkout, and F for fructose, F for fat gets dealt with on the fat pathway over here, and everything in nature and our lymphatic, our yellow brick road, remember, our whole body has been designed to keep those two energy sources in order not to keep those two energy sources separated, in order to not overload this guy and not send these haywire at the same time. What implications does this bond have when this tight bond is going to ensure that this little dude arrives at the checkout at exactly the same time as this one? Because remember, red F for fructose, red F for fat pathway, fructose gets digested here. But unlike fat, proper fat, dietary fat that goes up the yellow brick road, this guy doesn't. It comes through with this guy and hits the liver at exactly the same time. Tell you more soon. Bye.